There's a peculiar kind of silence that follows heartbreak. It's not loud, it doesn't shout or scream, it just settles, like a fog in your bones, like a sound that never quite echoes. That was the silence I felt the morning I received the email. Not long ago, I was the kind of mother who believed in showing up, even when uninvited, even when unseen. I showed up when my daughter forgot her lunch in 6th grade. I showed up when she broke her wrist in high school basketball. I showed up when her voice cracked over the phone during her first big breakup. And, ironically, I showed up in every way that didn't count when it came time for her to get married. But let me take you back a few months before the wedding that never was. It was an ordinary Sunday. I was standing in my kitchen, humming along to an old Joni Mitchell song while prepping lemon bars. Emily's favorite. She always said they reminded her of childhood. The plan was simple. Emily and her fiancé, Andrew, would drop by for lunch. We'd sip iced tea, talk about flower arrangements, maybe argue gently about seating charts. I even ironed the napkins. They never came. The text came in at 11:17 a.m. "Hey Mom, we're running late. Actually, we might just reschedule. Andrew's parents invited us to brunch." No apology, no punctuation, just a last-minute dismissal, like I was the rain check no one intended to redeem. Still, I kept the lemon bars. I even wrapped them up in wax paper and left them at her doorstep the next morning, along with a note. "Just in case you still love the way they taste." I never got a reply. At the time, I didn't see it as a warning sign. I chalked it up to wedding stress, millennial busyness, or just a generational gap I wasn't cool enough to cross. You see, I had trained myself over years of widowhood, of single parenting, of scraping by while smiling, to excuse the inexcusable, especially from those I loved. But love without respect is just a slow bleed, and I had been hemorrhaging for years. The breaking point wasn't the lemon bars. It wasn't the canceled lunch or the voicemail she never returned. It was an email, a 2-paragraph email with no subject line, just her name in my inbox, sterile and unassuming. I opened it expecting a thank you for the final deposit I had sent toward her venue. Instead, I found something far colder. She wasn't uninviting me directly. She was reassigning me to the screen. "Hi, Mom. After much discussion, Andrew and I have decided to keep the ceremony very intimate. Due to space constraints and Andrew's mom's preferences, we think it would be best if you watch the wedding via Livestream. We've set up a Google Meet link. It'll be just like being there. LOL." LOL. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was what they didn't say. No, I love you. No, thank you. No, I hope you understand. Just a link, just instructions, just a replacement. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't write back with rage or remorse. I simply replied, "Sure. Enjoy your big day." That was the moment something inside me unclenched. You see, for years, I had been writing myself out of my own story, always placing myself on the sidelines of the people I gave everything to. I gave my daughter a childhood she didn't have to recover from. I gave her my time, my money, my body, my sleep, my silence. And what I got in return was a screen invite to one of the most sacred moments in a family's life. People say that love is unconditional, but that's only half true. Real love, the kind that heals, the kind that nourishes, must also be reciprocal, or it becomes a burden disguised as devotion. And that morning, sitting alone with cold coffee and a warm void in my chest, I decided I would no longer carry what wasn't mine. That's where this story begins. Not with the email, not even with the wedding, but with the decision to stop apologizing for being hurt. This isn't a revenge story. This isn't a warning. This is a reckoning, a reclamation of dignity. Because too many mothers are taught that their worth lies in their usefulness. that their place is behind the curtain, arranging costumes, and clapping from the dark, never stepping onto the stage. But not anymore. I won't pretend that what came next was easy, or clean, or without consequence. But it was real, and it was mine. And maybe, just maybe, it might help someone else, someone like you, finally give themselves permission to stop trying to earn love they already gave freely. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. The cost of unseen sacrifice. You never quite realize how invisible you've become until the people you love start acting like you were never there to begin with. In the weeks that followed that email, the one that reclassified me from mother of the bride to Livestream viewer, I found myself remembering the years in slices, not memories, but moments, small, quiet sacrifices that no one had kept track of but me. Like the time I sold my wedding ring to pay for Emily's last semester of college. She never knew. I told her I'd moved on, that I wanted a simpler life without jewelry. The truth was, my credit card was maxed out and the bursar's office didn't take payment plans that year. Or the nights I stayed up until 3 a.m. sewing costumes for her school play, using threadbare fabric from clearance bins. She had the lead role, I had blisters on my fingers. I clapped the loudest from the back row and told myself that was enough. Or the Thanksgiving I spent alone when she got a last-minute invitation to Andrew's family cabin in Lake Tahoe. "It's just easier if I go with them," she had texted. No call, just a casual bypassing of the woman who used to cut her turkey into tiny squares and shape mashed potatoes into hearts. The thing about sacrifice is that when it's done right, it disappears. It doesn't leave a receipt. It doesn't demand applause. But oh, how quietly it accumulates, like dust in corners, like shadows behind closed doors. I wasn't keeping score. I never had. But I also never thought I'd be benched from a game I'd helped fund, train, and emotionally sponsor. I began to ask myself questions I had never allowed before. Was I a good mother? Or was I just available? Was I loved? Or was I just useful? There's a difference, you know. One fills you, the other empties you slowly. I confided in no one, not at first, because shame has a way of mimicking guilt, and I felt both. Ashamed that I felt hurt, guilty that I wasn't rising above it. As women, we are taught to forgive, to extend grace, to understand both sides. But understanding is not the same as accepting mistreatment, and forgiveness does not require continued access. One morning, about a week after the email, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the bank statement. My pen hovered over the line marked "Final Wedding Transfer, $50,000, pending." I had the form ready. The transaction was scheduled for Friday. I took a deep breath and reached for my phone. "Carlos, it's Margaret. I need to cancel a wire." He paused. "The one for your daughter's wedding?" "Yes." "May I ask why?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because I've remembered the difference between being a mother and being a wallet." He didn't say anything after that, just processed the cancellation and wished me a good day. I imagined his eyes flickering with quiet sympathy, but I didn't need it. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted space. That evening, I opened the closet in the hallway. Inside was a box labeled "Later." It was filled with things I had once loved: my camera, old novels, a French grammar book I'd always planned to study someday. I pulled out the book and sat on the couch. For the first time in years, I read not to escape, but to return to myself. A few days later, Luke called. I didn't pick up. Then he showed up. He walked in without asking, same as always, like my house was still his childhood sanctuary. And I suppose it had been, for a long time. "Emily's freaking out," he said, pacing like a storm. "She said you canceled the transfer. Are you serious?" "I am." "But they're counting on it." "I was counted out first." God, why do you always make everything about yourself? That's when I realized he had learned the same emotional language Emily had, one where the people who give the most are expected to ask the least. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just opened the door and said, "Get out." He blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Out." There was a moment, a quiet one, when even the air stilled. And then he left. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was mine. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the porch. No calls, no interruptions. Just the wind, the sound of birds, and my own heartbeat, steady and unapologetic. I started making a list, not of regrets, but of things I wanted to do. Learn pottery, eat dinner without waiting for a text, visit Florence, not just dream about it, laugh without second-guessing the echo. A part of me feared I was becoming bitter, but bitterness is born of resentment, and resentment is a seed watered by silence. I wasn't silent anymore. I was becoming someone new. Someone who didn't measure her value in deposits or dinner plans. Someone who no longer begged to be part of a moment that should have been hers by default. The negotiation that wasn't. Guilt is a language fluent manipulators speak with grace. But when you've been on the receiving end of it for too long, it becomes background noise, like an old radio station you've outgrown. 2 days after I canceled the wire transfer, the messages began. "Mom, we need to talk. Why are you doing this? The venue said payment didn't go through. Andrew's parents are furious. This is embarrassing. Please don't ruin my wedding." Each message came with a tone shift. First, it was confusion, then frustration, then something closer to fear. But not once, not even once, did she say she was sorry. I stared at my phone, feeling a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a storm from behind soundproof glass. And then came the final blow. "We can talk about you attending, but we need the funds first." There it was, not an invitation, a transaction. My motherhood, my presence, my love, all tied to a $sign. I didn't respond. You see, people like Emily don't understand boundaries until they collide with them. My silence wasn't cruelty, it was education. The kind that doesn't come with a warm hug, but with a slammed door and the realization that unconditional love still has limits. That morning, I brewed my coffee slowly, deliberately. For years, I had rushed through this part of my day, always answering a call, prepping for work, or worrying about someone else's schedule. But today, the ritual was mine, a silent declaration of independence. I walked to the window, cup in hand, and watched the dogwood tree sway in the wind. Spring had arrived in Oregon, quietly, like healing. Later that day, Robert from work stopped by my desk again. "Lunch?" he asked, holding 2 menus like a peace offering. I hesitated. "I heard the new Italian place has lemon risotto," he added with a soft smile. And I strike me as someone who's due for a soft reset. I laughed. It was the first unforced sound that had come from my mouth in days. We sat by the window, the sunlight warm on our shoulders. He talked about his grandkids. I talked, finally, about the wedding, the email, the decision. I laid it out not like a rant, but like a memoir in progress, one chapter at a time. When he finished, he nodded and said something I'll never forget. Love is not currency, and even if it were, yours has always been priceless. It's just that some people prefer to spend borrowed wealth and never repay. That afternoon, I didn't return to my desk right away. Instead, I went to the park. I sat on a bench, scribbling thoughts into a notebook I hadn't touched in years. I wrote down every time I had been made to feel small, invisible, or replaceable. And then, next to each memory, I wrote one word: no more. That evening, someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find Sophia, Emily's childhood best friend, standing there. She looked older now, but her eyes still held that same uncertain kindness I remembered from their teenage sleepovers. "Hi, Mrs. Collins," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I led her inside, the kettle already warm on the stove. She hesitated before speaking. "Emily's a wreck," she said finally. "She didn't expect you to actually withdraw." I raised an eyebrow. "So I was supposed to keep giving, even after being dismissed?" "She thought you'd understand," Sophia murmured. I did. I understood perfectly. Sophia looked down, cheeks flushed. She asked me to come, to ask if there's anything she can say or do to fix it. I sipped my tea. Words are easy, especially when people are desperate. But love isn't something you negotiate under financial duress. It's something you honor in quiet moments when no one is watching. She nodded slowly, understanding sinking in. I think she knows she messed up, but she doesn't know how to come back from it. That's the problem, I said gently. She's not supposed to come back to the same place. She's supposed to grow. There was a long silence. And then Sophia asked, if she truly apologized, could that change anything? I looked her straight in the eye. No, I said, because forgiveness is not the same as access, and I'm no longer opening doors to rooms where I'm only allowed in when I'm needed. Sophia didn't argue. She simply stood, thanked me, and left. The wedding didn't happen, not the way they imagined. They found a backyard venue 3 weeks later. No string quartet, no 5-course meal, no magazine-worthy photos. Just a few plastic chairs, Andrew's parents, and a strange smile. I wasn't invited, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be. I spent that weekend planting herbs in the garden: basil, rosemary, mint. As my hands pressed into the earth, I realized something profound. Things that grow require care, but also space. Emily may one day understand, or she may not, but I am no longer living my life in the waiting room of someone else's learning curve. I'd always wanted to try it. Years ago, I clipped an ad out of a magazine, "Mold something real with your hands," and tucked it into my journal, right next to a photo of a vase I loved. I told myself I'd go someday. Someday had finally arrived. At first, I felt clumsy. My hands trembled. The clay collapsed. I apologized too much, a habit I hadn't realized had become second nature. But the instructor, a woman named Miriam, with soft eyes and calloused fingers, simply smiled. Let it collapse. That's part of the process. I would carry those words with me for months. I also began eating differently. Not healthy in the diet fad sense, but with attention. I stopped rushing through dinners. I bought herbs from the farmer's market. I tried recipes that required time. I ate by candlelight even when alone, especially when alone. Because loneliness, I discovered, wasn't the absence of people. It was the absence of connection with yourself, and I was building that connection back. Then came the bookstore. There's a small shop downtown called the Paper Nest. Tucked between a florist and an antique map gallery, it smells of cinnamon and old pages. I used to pass it every week on the way to work and tell myself, another time. One Saturday morning, I walked in, and I didn't walk out for 2 hours. I met Helen, the owner, 62, witty, blunt, the kind of woman who wore purple scarves and didn't believe in small talk. She had the look, she said, squinting over her glasses. What look? The one people get when they're trying to remember who they were before life demanded they become someone else. I laughed and then cried. She handed me a tissue and a novel. This one will hurt you a little, then teach you a lot. We had tea every Saturday after that. Sometimes we spoke of books, sometimes of grief. Sometimes we just sat quietly and existed. It was enough. People noticed the change. At work, Robert said, "You're brighter these days." Even my neighbor, Janice, commented while we watered our flower beds, "You seem lighter, like you finally exhaled after holding your breath for years." And she was right. Because somewhere between canceling that wire transfer and kneading clay in a sunlit studio, I had found the one person I'd spent years neglecting. Me. Then, one Sunday afternoon, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, a handwritten letter in navy blue ink, the loops of each G and Y unmistakably familiar. It was from Emily. She didn't beg, she didn't bargain. She told me she had started therapy, that she was beginning to unpack years of inherited patterns and expectations, that she realized she had treated my love like a subscription, always available, renewable, convenient, that she didn't know how to rebuild what we had, but she was willing to learn. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to respond, but I wasn't angry either. I had reached that rare place where grief and growth coexist, not as enemies, but as travelers walking the same road in different shoes. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in over 10 years. I danced. Alone, barefoot in my living room to a Billie Holiday record I found in a thrift store. I twirled slowly, awkwardly at first, then freely, like a woman who remembered her own rhythm. I laughed out loud. Not because anything was funny, but because for the first time in decades, I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight. Not my daughter's disappointment, not my son's expectations, not society's quiet instructions on how women should age gracefully, which really means silently. I was Margaret. No prefix, no role, no explanation. Just Margaret. And that was enough. A week later, I got a call from the pottery studio. The assistant said, "Miriam's out sick. Would you be open to leading today's class?" I laughed. I'm barely qualified to make a bowl that doesn't collapse. "But they like your energy," she replied. "You don't rush. You let people be." So I said yes. And there, in that sunlit room, with clay on my hands and soft jazz playing in the background, something shifted. I was no longer just learning. I was guiding. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. And in the corner of the studio, there was a man. Mid-60s, silver hair, paint-stained shoes. He sculpted birds. Tiny, delicate birds with wings that looked like they could lift off the shelf. After class, he approached me. "You center the room," he said. I blinked. "Pardon?" "You don't try to fix anyone. That's rare." His name was Thomas, a retired landscape architect, widowed for 8 years, had 2 daughters, liked books about trees, and had a habit of quoting poetry at random moments. Over time, we began sharing space. At first, it was just pottery, then coffee after class, then walks in the arboretum. Then conversations that didn't ask for solutions, only presence. He never asked about Emily or Luke. He asked about me. What kind of music made me cry? What scent reminded me of childhood? What I dreamed of when no one else was listening. One evening, we sat on my porch as the sky bruised into dusk. Thomas sipped chamomile tea. I had my usual red wine. He asked, "Do you believe that love can find us more than once?" I looked at the stars and answered carefully. I believe love evolves. What I had with my husband was lightning. What I had with my children was fire, but maybe now I want something more like soil. Soil, he smiled. Stable, quiet, alive underneath. He nodded, and we didn't say anything else that night. But when he left, he kissed my hand, gently, like it was a sacred thing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt tender instead of tired. In the months that followed, I didn't fall in love like a young woman. I opened to love like a grown one. We didn't make promises, we made dinners. We didn't talk about forever, we talked about today. We didn't fill each other's holes, we met each other whole. Thomas didn't save me, and I didn't rescue him. We simply walked side by side, two people who had outlived their old selves and decided to meet again not as survivors, but as explorers. He never once asked me to shrink. I never once felt the need to apologize for the space I took up. One Sunday morning, as we gardened side by side, he looked up and said, "You know, Margaret, you're the most peaceful rebellion I've ever met." I laughed. What does that even mean? It means you changed your entire life without shouting once, and that's power.
People often ask if I've forgiven my daughter. I tell them that forgiveness is not the same as returning to the scene. Yes, I forgive, but I also remember. And I respect myself enough to require new terms for any future relationship, ones built on mutual care, not guilt. Emily and I write occasionally now. Letters, not texts. She still has healing to do. So do I. But we're no longer pretending. And that, to me, is the beginning of something real. Not out of pity, but recognition, and something else too. Gratitude, that I had survived that season and made it to this one. One Sunday morning, Luke called. It had been 3 months. "Hi, Mom," he said, awkward, heavy. "I was wondering if we could meet, just talk." I paused. Not because I was angry, I wasn't, but because I no longer accepted every invitation simply because it was offered. "All right," I said. "Coffee shop, Tuesday, noon." We met at a small cafe near his office. He looked older than I remembered, not in his face, but in his eyes. The kind of aging that comes from losing the illusion that your mother will always say yes. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, "about that day I came over, the way I spoke to you. I was wrong." I stirred my tea, letting the silence do some of the work. He went on. "I think I always saw you as unshakable, like no matter what I did, you'd be there. But you're human, and I never treated you like one." I looked at him for a long time before answering. "I taught you that," I said gently, "by always showing up, by never saying no, by pretending I didn't need anything." He nodded. "I guess we both played a part." Exactly. That's what growing up is, really. It's not about blaming your parents or forgiving them blindly. It's about seeing them as people, flawed, complex, trying. And it's about having the courage to re-meet each other, not as roles, but as individuals. We talked for an hour. We didn't solve everything, but we started over. Not from the beginning, from the truth. A few weeks later, I received a second letter from Emily. This one was different. No requests, no conditions. Just a story. She wrote about walking through a bookstore and seeing a woman who reminded her of me, holding a poetry book, hair silver at the temples, laughing at something only she understood. I wanted to run to her and say, "That's my mother," or at least it should be. She wrote about her own therapy sessions, about realizing how much she had buried under expectations, hers, Andrew's, society's. I thought control made me strong, but all it did was make me scared, and I took that fear out on you. And at the very end, she said something I hadn't realized I'd been waiting to hear. "If you ever want to meet again, I won't bring a request, just myself." I folded the letter and placed it next to the first one. Then I went outside and planted sage next to the rosemary. Sage means wisdom.
We haven't met yet, and that's okay. Because healing doesn't come with deadlines. It comes in moments, like when I catch my reflection and no longer flinch. Like when I laugh and don't second-guess the sound. Like when I sleep through the night and wake without dread. I am not waiting to be chosen. I have already chosen myself. And that is not selfishness. That is survival. That is maturity. That is love, the kind I now understand. Some people think letting go means giving up, but I think it means growing up, out of roles that no longer fit, out of scripts we never wrote, out of the fear that our worth is tied to how much we give away. Letting go doesn't mean slamming doors. It means leaving them unlocked and walking away, knowing that anyone who values you will knock. And when they do, you get to decide whether to answer. Not out of guilt, but out of choice. The kind of love I give myself now. Every morning, I make my coffee by hand. No machine, no rush. I boil the water, measure each spoon carefully, and listen to the quiet drip of the brew into my favorite white ceramic cup. That sound, so simple, so subtle, is one I never used to have time to hear. I sit by the window at 8:15, where sunlight always finds me. No phone, no messages, just me and the morning. It's a small ritual, but it saved me. If someone asked me now, what is love? I wouldn't say what I used to, that it's sacrifice or patience or always putting others first. I would say, love is attention. It's listening to yourself. It's cooking a beautiful meal just for you. It's looking in the mirror and not speaking cruelly to your reflection. It's stepping out of the roles you've outgrown, even if you've worn them your whole life. I'm no longer a full-time mother. I'm no longer a wife. I'm no longer the woman of just one more transfer. Or can I borrow a little, Mom? I'm Margaret. I'm a woman who reads French novels, drinks red wine on Friday nights, and dances alone to Billie Holiday. I grow herbs. I make pottery. I write letters I never send. And I am in love, not with anyone, but with life itself. Thomas still visits, not every day. We don't bind each other with routine, only with presence. When he comes, he brings strawberries from the morning market. When I go to his house, I bring a book that made me cry the night before. We don't talk about forever. We talk about today. He never asks for less of me, and I never have to apologize for being too much. I used to think love at this age was a luxury. Now I know, love at this age is a choice. Sometimes Emily writes letters. She's begun her own journey, learning to love without control, learning to apologize without explaining it away. Her words no longer drip with guilt. They're filled with questions. How did you know you'd forgiven? How did you start over after everything fell apart? Can a woman still be beautiful even if no one's watching her anymore? I haven't answered them all, because some questions we must find the answers to on our own. But I believe if one day Emily walks into this house with an open heart, I will embrace her. Not as a mother who was once cast aside, but as a woman who chose to rise. Lately, I've started keeping a notebook. Not a memoir, not a will. Just pages I call a self-love handbook for women who forgot themselves. The first line reads, "If your presence can be negotiated, then so can your effort." Some afternoons, I sit on my porch and watch the sunset sweep through the trees. I don't do anything. I no longer feel guilty for doing nothing. I just exist, fully, softly, wholly. And I know now, this is the kind of love I had been searching for all my life. A love that doesn't ask me to become someone else. A love that allows me to simply be, in silence, in tenderness, in wild aliveness. I spent many years learning to love others, but it took me a lifetime to learn how to love myself. And now, I am no longer afraid. I am not afraid of being alone. I am not afraid of being left behind. I am not afraid of being misunderstood, because I understand myself. And that is the quietest, deepest, most powerful kind of victory. The end, but truly a beginning. You don't have to burn yourself up to keep others warm. I was once that fire. Now I am sunlight, not dazzling, but steady, not dramatic, but warm. And I hope you, whoever you are, wherever you are in your life, find your own sunlight too.